So we're all familiar with the definition of sexual harassment in Australia. It is an unwelcome sexual advance or an unwelcome request for sexual favours which makes a person feel humiliated, offended or intimidated. Now we know that both men and women can be perpetrators and victims of sexual harassment, but the research tells us, and this is indisputable, that the vast majority of perpetrators are men and the vast majority of victims are women. In fact, the further research tells us that some 60% or possibly even as much as 80% of women have experienced sexual harassment at some point in time in their working careers. Now, however, predominantly as a result of the Me Too movement, which was initiated in the United States, there has been a sea change in the attitudes towards sexual harassment generally and sexual harassment in the workplace in particular. Sexual harassment has now become an important issue of public concern which has been adopted by politicians, public figures and significant elements of the media, and is an issue of fairly constant debate. As a result of this, we at Symetra have 3 pointers or recommendations for dealing with the challenges which are now arising in relation to the changes pertaining to sexual harassment in the workplace. Our first point is that employers will have to be proactive rather than reactive in addressing issues of sexual harassment. As a result of the changes, victims, and women in particular, are becoming empowered and more willing to open up and to make their stories of sexual harassment known. The second recommendation we would make is with regard to the scope and purpose of sexual harassment training. Companies should not see sexual harassment training as a means of resisting legal liability or as a means of simply satisfying employees that the company is fulfilling a basic duty, but rather as a means to addressing fundamental cultural change within the organization which will reduce the incidence of sexual harassment. In fact, the old type of training was largely ineffective because it focused on simply informing employees of what their rights and obligations were and indicating to them how they would institute claims when they had grievances pertaining to sexual harassment. The real benefit of sexual harassment training should be to instill in employees the knowledge and understanding that they feel included and respected, and that behavior which embodies sexual harassment runs counter to this kind of culture. And the final point is that employers and everyone else in the organization needs to be aware that sexual harassment issues are no longer to fall on the shoulders of the victims alone. In the past, it was felt that when the victim had a complaint, he or she was to address it personally and to pursue any claims in his or her personal capacity. In fact, now it is being realized that dealing with sexual harassment is the obligation and the responsibility of the corporation or the organization at large. And importantly, there is a role to be played by bystanders in addressing matters of sexual harassment. Bystanders are often in a position to intervene or to give evidence when they see sexual harassment occurring, and that they should not leave it to others to come to the assistance of victims, but everyone should see it as his or her responsibility to come forward and to play a role in minimizing this harm which occurs in Australian workplaces. So for more information about how to address the issues of sexual harassment proactively, to instill a culture change which will mitigate against the risks of sexual harassment, please visit our website or give us a call.